Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. It's another kind of overcasty, somewhat crappy day. It's about nine. It's about 11 minutes after 9. It's a Tuesday. So yeah, this is a video I've been wanting to get to for some reason. Kind of got sidetracked. I bought this movie that I'm going to be talking about today. I bought it during that big video haul that same day where I got a shit ton of movies. I went to Opera House Video. They had this giant sale, and then I also, as luck had had worked out, I ended up going up to Bull Moose that same day, and then so I walked away at the end of the day. By Saturday night, I had literally a box full of movies, just incredible. And so I've been working on putting up these videos covering all of the movies I bought. And this movie today, for some reason, I watched it and I loved the shit out of it. And for whatever reason, I got sidetracked with some other things I was watching, and I never got to the video that I wanted to make. And then I I decided to just watch it again and have it fresh in my head. And God, what an awesome movie! This is kind of the very definition of horror exploitation, and that is Legacy of Blood. Came out in 1978. It was directed by Andy Mulligan. This was put out by Severin. Severin is one of the best companies when it comes to releasing and or re-releasing a lot of these underground exploitation gems. And this movie is no exception. I mean, this movie is so bad it's good. I don't know how else to describe it. And it's hilarious. The transfer of this film is really awesome. It's a really good package. Legacy of Blood. It came out in '78. There's actually two versions of the film. There's one that is a really well. There's two cuts. There's one that I think is where it's not a restored version, and then there's a like basically a really restored version that is on here. And I didn't watch the really rough cut version. I've only watched the remastered version of this film of Legacy of Blood, and it's awesome. I mean, the first thing it made me think of when I watched this movie was that it reminded me a lot of Herschel Gordon Lewis. Just the way how rough this movie is, and how, for all intents and purposes, it's how bad it is. But I couldn't stop watching it. I couldn't stop watching it, and it's interesting because you don't really think it's. Again, I never heard of this movie before I bought it. I picked it up totally on a whim. I was, I was kind of like, well, let's just go for it. And I picked it up. It was a really good price. Severin has, a lot of great titles. I have quite a few Severin movies at this point. And I think it's pretty safe to say that Severin as a company doesn't really disappoint. I have probably at least 8 to 10 other Severin titles, and I can't think of any of the movies that I have of theirs that are not great. So, being that I have really tried to, focus and also step up in my collecting and buying a lot of these exploitation movies, I've gotten really familiar with a lot of the companies out there. And Severin is definitely one of the best. I mean, you have so many great, companies. I can't stress it enough on how, if you're into a lot of these low budget exploitation movies, this is the best time to be a collector. And again, I don't know, I have a feeling that it might not last. It could just go away. I have a feeling there's like a little bit of a trend, or a little bit of a, there's been this buzz or excitement. I feel like there's been this, cult fan base for a lot of these films that has kind of grown over the years. A lot of these films came out, or really, and some films didn't have any impact at all when they came out. But then, and I attribute a lot of these happenings to the internet, really, and with technology. With the transition from film to DVD to, and then even Laserdisc, to where it evolved to Blu-ray and 4K. You know, technological advances, but then there's also a demand for a lot of these things. I've read a lot about different companies of where they tried to stay, ahead of the curve when they first started putting out these movies. And, a lot of the fans were, especially in the first wave of this whole kind of thing, people were, the hardcore collectors really wanted to get a definitive version of a film, like wanted to get a really good, pristine quality, because they knew it could be possible. And they just weren't really satisfied with the quality of some of the movies that were coming out. And, you know, and I think a lot of these things came about because of the demand of a lot of folks out there who love these films, where eventually we're right now. And since then, a lot of other companies have sprung up, and it's pretty amazing. It's pretty unbelievable. Kind of unprecedented. I've talked about that with a couple of friends and people, like, to think that some of these movies that are just so obscure, so underground, get this, world class treatment, is pretty special and pretty unbelievable, and kind of ridiculous, and just like baffling and amazing all at the same time. I mean, you have like a movie like Legacy of Blood, for instance. You figure the treatment that it gets when it gets restored, and with all these beautiful reissues and re-releases, and beautiful packages that they get released in. You think it would be reserved for films like, Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List, or big Hollywood production films that were, massive successes. They were, a mass success in the box office, or they, won numerous Academy Awards, and like, that's understandable that the companies would get behind that and put a lot of money into putting out a beautiful rendition of that film. But which you do, but then you have all of these like totally like trashy movies that are getting that treatment, and it's super awesome. So as a collector, it's funny, I have a little bit of a sense of urgency around my purchases and my love for these films. Again, these are my favorite films, and I got into a conversation with a woman who has been checking out a lot of the videos and my posts on Facebook, and she's a new fan, and I really appreciate the interaction. And she was talking about, on one of her posts, she had commented on one of my posts, one of my reviews for the film, for a particular film, and she was saying on how, she's been into a lot of these films for a long time, and she's been checking out a lot of movies that came out, when she wasn't even alive, and she's been falling in love with a lot of these exploitation movies all over again, and then, all of these new discoveries. And she was saying on how she'll take any of these movies over any new, over any like new releases that come out, especially in the horror genre, because of the cornball nature of how the films were put together, the entertainment value, the ridiculousness, the shocking violence, the rawness, and not really, coming across a film that doesn't have any kind of thing of where it sticks to what, quote unquote, is like the conventional way to make a film. And that's like, in kind of in a nutshell, like kind of how she was describing her experience as a fan, and her what, kind of how she feels um towards cinema, and especially horror. And it's like I had said, I had responded back to her saying, I completely agree in every way. That being said, I do think there are some really great newer horror movies that come out, and I try to stay up on new releases and new films that are coming out, and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I always go back to my favorite decades, the 70s, 80s. And I've been, a lot of these posts, a lot of these videos I've been doing lately have been movies that are in the 60s and beyond. So, and a lot of new discoveries. And so I always going back to this as my source of main entertainment and my main source of inspiration. It's so hilarious and great and wonderful. And again, like I said, I always try to tie in music, and like with my band Quantum, the same thing. I'm so incredibly influenced by these movies for my band, and they are the biggest. These movies are the biggest, not only aesthetically, but you know, just creatively all around how these films were made. They are the biggest influence on my band Quantum. So I think, I don't know, I kind of try to keep different perspectives around the music, but I kind of feel like I'm starting to hear more and more of those influences in my own music. And I've had a couple people say that too. So, we're it has some of those same elements. But I had responded to her. The other thing I had said to her, this woman who had chimed in, was that I'd used the example that the last year or this year I was on a podcast as a guest, and with this guy Matthew Littlefield, and he had asked me, point blank, so what is it? What is it about these movies that you love so much? These totally weird, bizarre, low budget movies. And I said, like, well, more or less in a nutshell, to me, it's like it's kind of like putting on a punk rock record, and you love the. You don't sit there. It's not an intellectual thing, but you just love the rawness of it. You love that it's just like coming at you. It's going for the jugular. It's really raw. It's not perfect. It's not, there's mistakes. It's like done in one take, and it's just got this kind of raw guerrilla style energy. And that's, in a nutshell, why I love these films. And so it's great. And I generally feel too, on the side of that, I generally feel that a lot of artists, in the film industry, directors and also, musicians, especially musicians, kind of just take themselves a little too seriously most of the time. It's all like, look at me and my motivations to create this art, and it's all from this very, introspective, quiet place, and it's all kind of serious. And I get that. And I get that is very much a part of the creative flow for creating art. But, you gotta, have an ability to, like, not take yourself seriously, and not, like, and be able to laugh at yourself and say, well, at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything, and it's kind of a little bit of a joke, and I can laugh at it and have fun with it, and not lose the whole, I don't know, maybe the childlike perspective of that. You're just, you're a kid in the candy store and you're just having fun also, aside from the the more serious you know ingredients. So it's an interesting thing. But I never seen this movie, and I just think that this movie is super awesome. There's some really cool special features on here too. There's a couple interviews with the producer and one of the actors in this film. And the premise of this movie is pretty cool. It's basically centered on this family, this pretty big family, and they basically there's a death in the family, and that involves the parents, the and the will is being taken care of, and this family assembles in this house to kind of read through the will and to try to gather what they're going to be doing as far as the estate. But meanwhile, while that's happening, there's a slasher killer in the story, and that person starts killing off everybody in the family. And then there's kind of this big surprise ending as to who that killer is. Uh, the kills, and again, the thing that's funny about this movie is like it's super hilarious, it's super ridiculous, and then but you don't feel like the first half of the movie. It doesn't feel necessarily like it's a horror movie. It just seems like a really goofy, uh, ridiculous, character study of this kind of wacky family, and they're really really eccentric and just kind of strange. But then after time it changes. The tone of the film changes, and it definitely becomes a horror film, and it definitely becomes a slasher film. And the kills in this movie are freaking awesome, really impressive. Like so incredibly low budget. It looks like this movie was shot for like $65, but the kills are awesome and kind of shocking. There's one scene in particular where somebody is like tied to a table and they're like sawed in half, and it's pretty amazing. It's pretty wonderful. I guess the blood that they used in this movie was all beet juice, which is pretty funny. They talk about how beet juice was the choice of the day for their use of blood, and there's a lot of beet juice in this movie, and it's totally ridiculous but amazing. The kills are awesome. Really, there's like 4 or 5 sequences in this film where there's some brutal kills, and the first one is kind of shocking because it happens like you're kind of getting a sense that okay, this movie's getting a little bit darker. There is somebody in this house. There's somebody kind of that is clearly deranged without giving the story away, and there's something going on. You don't know who it is. It's a little bit of a mystery, and then suddenly there's the first kill, and it's totally shocking, and it's like wow, and it happens so quick, and my reaction was like whoa, what the fuck just happened? And it's great. It's super awesome, very satisfying, and it just happens really abruptly, and suddenly, like I said, the whole kind of film tone just shifts, and it definitely becomes like this horror slasher movie. Very very cool. And the director, Andy Milligan, who is a director I had never heard of before. I'd never seen any of his films. After seeing this movie, I've done a little bit of research, and there's some cool, interesting special features on this disc where they talk about Andy Milligan, and he's a pretty fascinating character. He was, I guess, apparently a playwright for many years in New York City in the 70s and also in the 80s, but he also directed all kinds of movies, a ton of movies, all of these crazy, wacky exploitation movies. Blood Rights in 1968, and again, I've never seen any of his movies. This is the first one, and I never had heard of him before. So again, that's one of the beauties of sometimes taking a risk and taking a chance. Is now I really love this movie. So Andy Milligan is a name I'm going to look for when I go to buy some more of these exploitation movies. So it's wonderful, and that's what it's all about. That for me at the end of the day, that sense of discovery. And how deep does that well go? Like if you're into a director, it's wonderful. Flesh Spot on 42nd Street in 73. The Rats Are Coming in 72. Bloodthirsty Butcher. I mean, just these titles alone are just amazing. 1970. Torture Dungeon in 1970. The Body Beneath, and another film in 1970. He was really prolific. Nightbirds in 1970. The Man with Two Heads. Guru the Mad Monk in 70. Wow. The Weirdo. Blood in 1973. Vapors in 63. And of course, Legacy of Blood in 78. House of Seven Bells. That's another movie. When I started to check out who Andy Milligan is, that came up a lot, and I've read a little bit about that film, and that's supposedly a really great film, one of his best ones. Monstrosity is another one. Carnage, just crazy, just totally wild. And you talk, like I said in the beginning of the show, when I first watched this movie, it made me think of I almost felt like I was watching a Herschel Gordon Lewis film, because it just has that, like, you have these different tiers of how films are made. Like, you have movies that are backed by major studios and they have this incredibly high production value, and then you have the world of, like, independent films, but a lot they put all of their money to into everything that you see, so it can have this feeling of, it's bigger than it actually is, but the budget is actually pretty small compared to a big Hollywood production. And then you have, like, pretty low budget films that are, you know, it's obvious that they are very low budget. They don't have quite the production value, but they're still pretty good. And then you have this other bottom kind of tier of where it's so low budget that you are amazed that it even got made, and that it's so, like, you know unbelievable. And I've always felt like Herschel Gordon Lewis is kind of like in that fourth tier, as well as a lot of great exploitation directors. And this movie reminded me of a film that would be kind of in that vicinity. Just so low budget where you're like, holy shit, like, I don't know how this movie ever got made, or how it, like, gets this treatment just because of how low budget it is. But again, it's that same thing. It's so bad, it's good. It's just got all of those elements that, in another context, or another style of a way that a film could be created, it would probably not work and be detrimental and be something that you couldn't watch, and it's just bad. And so there's that interesting thing with exploitation movies, where there's that fine line of where, it's right in the middle. Like, when a film is like that, it totes that line. I think a really good example of that is a movie that I know out there, people really love it, and then people really, really hate it. And it's so right in that middle vicinity, and that's a movie called Midnight. And I'm actually a really big fan of that movie, even though that movie is terrible in so many, in so many ways. But it really pushes that, it's right in the middle. And this movie is kind of like that too. Like, all of those things that would naturally work against the film in this context works for the film. It's really interesting. So I can't recommend this movie enough. It's fantastic, especially this version of Legacy of Blood. Check this check this out. This movie is a party, and I love it. So, and moving forward, I'm gonna be checking out, uh, you know, keep my eyes peeled for any other Andy Milligan releases or any other films, because pretty awesome, pretty awesome. So this is Jason Dean. Thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.